My own uncle, the CEO of the family company, laughed in my face when I presented the idea that would have saved his business. He looked at me, this man who was supposed to be a pillar of our family, and called me a naive boy chasing a digital fantasy. It was a dismissive, patronizing laugh, the kind that's meant to shrink you down to nothing, to make your passion feel like a childish whim. He thought he had crushed my spirit in that sterile, wood-paneled office. But he was wrong. I took that digital fantasy, the one he ridiculed, and I had a private meeting with his wife, my Aunt Eleanor, the one person in that entire ecosystem of wealth and tradition that he never ever saw coming. The one person he underestimated even more than he underestimated me. And that meeting changed everything. Before we dive into the whole story of how I went from being the family joke to the man who owned the punchline, do me a solid and hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It really helps more than you know. And I'm curious, where are you all watching from tonight? Drop a comment below and let me know. Trust me, you are not going to believe how this all ends. My story really begins not with an idea, but with a feeling. The persistent, gnawing feeling of being fundamentally misunderstood. To my family, I was Liam, the quiet one, the odd one out. They weren't cruel, not in the overt storybook sense. Theirs was a more insidious kind of neglect, a benign dismissal that can be far more damaging. My family, the Sterlings, built their name on something tangible, something you could hold in your hand, high-grade steel components. Sterling, Sons Manufacturing was my grandfather's legacy, a testament to post-war industrial grit. My uncle Richard inherited the CEO title like it was a birthright, and he wore it with an unshakable, and in my opinion, unearned confidence. He was a man who believed the world still operated on handshakes and the sheer quality of milled steel. He saw my fascination with computers, with the elegant, invisible world of code and data, as a frivolous hobby, a phase. To him, my hours spent in front of a glowing screen were no different than a child playing with building blocks. It was a harmless diversion before I came to my senses and took a real job, preferably in the Sterling Sons sales department, where I could learn the family business from the ground up the right way. My girlfriend Sarah was the only one who saw it differently. She saw the intricate architectures I'd map out on our whiteboard, the complex problems I'd solve with lines of code that looked like a foreign language to her. She didn't understand what I was doing, not technically, but she understood the passion. She saw the light in my eyes when I talked about efficiency, about integrated systems, about the future. She was my sanctuary in a world that saw me as a curiosity. She was the one who kept my own belief in myself from flickering out when the winds of family expectation blew cold, which they so often did. To truly understand the dynamic, you have to picture a Sterling family dinner. They were regular, mandatory affairs held in my uncle's cavernous, mahogany-filled dining room. The air was always thick with the scent of roasted meat and self-congratulation. At one end of the table sat Richard, holding court, his voice booming as he recounted some minor victory at the plant or lamented the laziness of the modern workforce. Opposite him was my Aunt Eleanor, perpetually serene and observant, a quiet island in her husband's sea of bluster. And then there was my cousin Chloe. Chloe was the family's crown jewel. She had gone to a prestigious business school, a fact that was mentioned at least 3 times per dinner, and had been gifted a high-level marketing position at Sterling Sons upon graduation. She was the embodiment of the family's values, status over substance, image over ability. She would talk breathlessly about her latest rebranding campaign, which usually involved slightly altering the font on the company letterhead, and my uncle would listen with a beaming pride that he never once directed my way. During these dinners, the conversation would inevitably turn to me. "So, Liam," Richard would say, a forkful of prime rib halfway to his mouth, "still tinkering with those little computer programs of yours? When are you going to get your hands dirty and join the real world?" It wasn't a question, it was a judgment. Chloe would often chime in with a syrupy, backhanded compliment. "Oh, Dad, leave him be. It's so sweet that he has a hobby he's passionate about. We can't all be business-minded, I guess." The words hung in the air, dripping with condescension. I learned early on to be reserved, to give vague, non-committal answers. "The IT work is going fine," I'd say, or, "I'm learning a lot. I built a wall around my real life, my real ambitions, because I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that they would never ever get it. They didn't see the world changing around them. They were living in a museum of their own making, and they were trying to make me one of the exhibits." Sarah would listen to me recount these dinners later, her hand tracing soothing circles on my back. "They're dinosaurs, Liam," she'd say, her voice fierce with loyalty. "They're staring at a meteor and talking about the weather." And she was right. The meteor was coming, and I was the only one who seemed to be looking up. I just didn't know yet that they would force me to build my own spaceship to survive it. The writing was on the wall for Sterling Sons Manufacturing, but I seemed to be the only one literate in that particular language. The company had built its reputation on producing a handful of highly specialized, incredibly durable steel components for heavy machinery. For decades, they were the undisputed kings of their niche. My grandfather had been a brilliant engineer and a savvy businessman. He built relationships that lasted a lifetime and a product that lasted even longer. But the world he built his empire in was vanishing. Technology was the tidal wave, and my Uncle Richard was standing on the beach, admiring his sandcastle. I saw the decline in the numbers I wasn't even supposed to have access to. I had, in a fit of youthful curiosity and questionable ethics, written a small script that scraped publicly available financial data and import-export records related to their industry. I was tracking their market share in near real time, and the graph was a slow, painful ski slope downwards. Their clients, legacy manufacturing giants themselves, were either going out of business or, more frequently, retooling their own operations. They were moving towards smart factories, towards integrated systems where every machine, every component, every shipment was part of a single interconnected digital network. They needed suppliers who could speak that language, whose parts weren't just dumb pieces of metal, but could communicate their status, their maintenance needs, their entire life cycle to a central hub. Sterling. Sons was still selling silent analog steel in a loud digital world. The company was an island of analog tradition in a sea of digital progress. Their inventory system was a series of dusty binders and an Excel spreadsheet managed by a woman who had been there since the 1970s. Their client relationship management was a collection of Rolodexes on Richard's desk. They were hemorrhaging efficiency and, as a result, money. Richard's response to this slow-motion crisis was to double down on what he knew. Quality sells itself. He'd boom in our family dinners. Trends come and go, but craftsmanship is forever. He saw the new technological demands not as an opportunity, but as a fad, an unnecessary complication. He believed the answer was to cut costs, to squeeze the suppliers, to work the employees harder. He was trying to patch a hole in the hull of a sinking ship with duct tape, while I was standing on the shore with a blueprint for a whole new engine. He refused to see that the very foundation of his business was becoming obsolete, and his pride was the anchor that was dragging the whole thing down to the bottom. My idea wasn't a sudden bolt of lightning. It was the culmination of years of quiet observation and relentless work. It was my answer to the slow decay I saw happening at Sterling Sons. For the better part of 3 years, I had been secretly, obsessively building a comprehensive software platform in my cramped apartment, fueled by cheap coffee and an unshakable belief that I was onto something. I called the project Nexus. It was an ambitious name for something that at the time only existed on my personal server, but it represented my core vision, connection. Nexus was designed to be the central nervous system for a modern manufacturing company. It wasn't just one piece of software, it was an entire ecosystem. It started with a dynamic inventory management system that used predictive analytics to manage stock, reducing waste, and eliminating shortages. It tracked every piece of raw material from the moment it entered the factory to the moment a finished component was shipped out. This flowed directly into a production scheduling module that optimized machine usage and labor allocation, streamlining the entire workflow on the factory floor. But the real heart of the system was the client-facing portal and the IoT integration. I had designed a small, durable sensor that could be embedded into the steel components Sterling Sons produced. These sensors would track performance, stress levels, and operational hours, feeding that data back into the system in real time. For a client, this was revolutionary. It meant they could predict maintenance needs before a part failed, preventing costly downtime. It meant they had a clear, transparent view of their supply chain. It transformed a simple piece of steel into an intelligent asset. The client portal was the window to all this data, a clean, intuitive dashboard where they could place orders, track shipments, and monitor the health of the components in their own machinery. It was proactive, it was efficient, and it was the future of the industry. I poured every spare moment into Nexus. While my cousin Chloe was designing new brochures, I was wrestling with complex database schemas. While my uncle was playing golf with other aging executives, I was teaching myself new coding languages to perfect the user interface. Sarah was my silent partner in this endeavor. She would bring me food when I forgot to eat, she would listen to me rant about a stubborn bug at 2 in the morning, and she would celebrate every small breakthrough as if it were a lottery win. The platform became my secret world, a place where my skills were not just a hobby, but the foundation of a potential revolution. I genuinely believed with every fiber of my being that this was not just a good idea, but the only way forward for the family business. It was the key to their survival, a bridge from their storied past to a prosperous future. And I was going to offer it to them on a silver platter. I just had to get my uncle to listen. Getting a formal meeting with my uncle was a challenge in itself. To him, I was his sister's kid, the quiet boy who played with computers. The idea of me having a serious business proposal was, in his mind, absurd. I couldn't go through official channels. I'd be laughed out of the building. So I had to use the only leverage I had: family. I cornered him at a Sunday barbecue, away from the main crowd, while he was tending to his oversized grill. I kept my pitch brief and respectful. I told him I had been working on a project, a software solution, specifically designed to address some of the efficiency issues I'd heard him complain about. I used his language, talking about reducing overhead and improving client retention. I could see the skepticism in his eyes, the slight curl of his lip, but he was cornered, and refusing to even listen would look bad. He finally relented with a sigh that made it clear he was doing me a massive, inconvenient favor. "All right, Liam," he said, flipping a burger with unnecessary force. "Tuesday morning, my office. You've got 10 minutes. Don't be late." The day of the presentation, I felt a strange mix of terror and exhilaration. I wore my only suit, which felt like a costume. I had my laptop, a sleek presentation, and a heart that was beating a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I had practiced my pitch with Sarah a dozen times. She had coached me, told me to stand tall, to speak clearly, to own my expertise. "You know more about this than he ever will," she'd said, kissing me for luck before I left. "Don't let him make you feel small." I arrived at the Sterling, Sun's headquarters, 15 minutes early. The building itself felt like a relic, with its dark wood paneling and portraits of my grandfather and great-grandfather staring down from the walls. I was escorted to Richard's office, a large, imposing room with a desk the size of a small car. He wasn't alone. Lounging in one of the leather armchairs, scrolling idly through her phone, was Chloe. My heart sank. Her presence was a clear signal. This wasn't a serious meeting. This was an amusement, a brief diversion before the real business of the day began. "Liam," Richard said, not bothering to stand up. "You know Chloe. She's heading up our new digital strategy, so I thought she should hear this pitch of yours." Chloe gave me a little wave and a smirk that said, "Let's see what the court jester has for us today." The 10 minutes he had promised me already felt like an eternity. But I took a deep breath, remembering Sarah's words, and I began. I plugged my laptop into the large monitor on his wall and started my presentation, my voice shaking slightly at first, but growing steadier as I delved into the familiar territory of my creation. I walked them through Nexus, from the inventory system to the IoT sensors. I showed them the data, the market analysis, the projected ROI. I poured all my passion, all my years of work into that presentation. For a fleeting moment, I thought I saw a flicker of something in Richard's eyes, not understanding, perhaps, but a glimmer of recognition that this was more complex than he had imagined. But then I looked at Chloe, who was barely stifling a yawn, and I knew I was doomed. The end of my presentation was met with a heavy, profound silence. It wasn't the silence of contemplation. It was the empty, dead air of complete and utter dismissal. I stood there, my hands trembling slightly, my heart still pounding from the adrenaline of the pitch. Richard leaned back in his enormous leather chair, steepling his fingers under his chin. He looked at me for a long moment, a slow, condescending smile spreading across his face. And then he laughed. It wasn't a chuckle. It was a full-throated, booming laugh that echoed off the wood-paneled walls of his office. It was a laugh that contained no humor, only ridicule. It was the sound of my 3 years of work, my passion, my hope for the family's legacy being utterly and completely invalidated. "Oh, Liam," he said, wiping a tear of mirth from his eye. Liam, that is quite the little project you've got there, all those charts and colors." Very impressive. He said impressive the way one might talk about a child's macaroni art project. "But this is the real world," he continued, leaning forward and placing his hands flat on his massive desk, as if to emphasize its solidity. "This is a world of steel, of grit, of handshake deals, and decades of trust. We sell steel, my boy, not pixels. We sell reality, not some digital fantasy." Every word was a carefully aimed blow. The condescension was suffocating. But Chloe, my dear cousin, delivered the final, twisting knife. She finally looked up from her phone, a bored expression on her face. "Dad's right, Liam," she said with a sigh, as if explaining a simple concept to a toddler. "It's really cute that you tried to help, honestly. But maybe you should leave the corporate strategy to the people who actually went to business school." She gave me a pitying smile, the kind you'd give to a lost puppy. "This is all a bit out of your league, don't you think?" The combination of his booming ridicule and her smirking dismissal was devastating. It was a 1-2 punch of humiliation. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, a feeling of such intense shame and anger that I couldn't even form a response. I just stood there, speechless, as they dismantled my dream piece by piece. I numbly packed up my laptop, the silence in the room now feeling heavier than ever. As I walked to the door, Richard delivered his parting shot. "Stick to fixing printers, son. It's what you're good at." The door clicked shut behind me, and I stood in the hallway, the sound of his laughter still ringing in my ears. In that moment, something inside me didn't just break, it hardened. The hurt was immense, a physical ache in my chest. But beneath it, a new feeling was taking root. A cold, clear, and unshakable resolve. They thought they had put me in my place. They had no idea they had just shown me the door to my own future. I drove home in a daze, the city streets a blur of color and light. The humiliation from that office was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. Richard's booming laugh and Chloe's smug, dismissive smirk played on a loop in my head. I had walked in there hoping to be a savior, and I had walked out a punchline. When I opened the door to my apartment, Sarah took one look at my face and knew. She didn't say, "I told you so." She didn't offer platitudes. She just wrapped her arms around me and held me, while the carefully constructed composure I had maintained in that office finally crumbled. I told her everything, the words tumbling out in a torrent of hurt and anger. I told her about the laugh, about Chloe's out-of-your-league comment, about Richard's final cutting remark to stick to fixing printers. She listened, her expression hardening from sympathy to a quiet, protective fury. "They're fools, Liam," she said, her voice low and fierce. "They're arrogant, blind fools. What you built is brilliant, and they're too stupid and proud to see it." Her unwavering belief was the only thing holding me together. But it was in that moment of utter dejection that a new thought began to form, a tiny spark in the darkness. It was a name, Mr. Harrison, Arthur Harrison. He had been my grandfather's closest friend and the original chief technology officer at Sterling Sons back when technology meant having a fax machine. He was a forward-thinking visionary who had been unceremoniously pushed out by Richard about a decade ago in a corporate restructuring that was really just Richard consolidating power and eliminating anyone who challenged his traditionalist views. Richard had always spoken of Mr. Harrison as a relic, a man who couldn't keep up, but I remembered him from my childhood as a kind, intensely intelligent man who had once explained the principles of binary code to me with sugar packets at a diner. On a gut instinct fueled by a cocktail of desperation and a newfound what do I have to lose attitude, I found his number online. I called him, my voice still shaky. I introduced myself as William Sterling's grandson, and to my surprise, he remembered me instantly. I explained, haltingly at first, that I had a business proposal. I wanted to show him something he might find interesting given his background. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "I always liked your grandfather. He was a good man. The son, not so much." A dry chuckle came down the line. "Meet me for coffee tomorrow morning. Let's see what you've got." The next morning, I sat across from a man with kind eyes and a mind that was clearly as sharp as it had ever been. I didn't give him the flashy presentation. I just opened my laptop and walked him through Nexus, programmer to programmer. I showed him the code, the architecture, the raw functionality. I explained the why behind every module, every line of logic. Mr. Harrison didn't interrupt me once. He just watched, his gaze intense, occasionally nodding to himself. He leaned closer to the screen, his fingers tracing the air as he followed a data flow diagram. The 10 minutes Richard had begrudgingly given me stretched into an hour, and then 2. When I finally finished, I felt drained, like I had poured out the last dregs of my professional soul onto the small cafe table. I leaned back, my fate, it seemed, in this man's hands. He was silent for a long time, just looking at the screen, then at me, then back at the screen. The silence was unnerving, but it was different from the one in Richard's office. This was the quiet of deep thought, of genuine analysis. Finally, he closed my laptop gently and pushed it back towards me. He looked me straight in the eye, and the expression on his face was one I had never seen from anyone in my professional life. It was pure, unadulterated respect. "Liam," he said, his voice raspy with emotion, "this is not just good. This is revolutionary. This is the single most elegant and comprehensive solution for the manufacturing sector I have ever seen. Coming from him, a man who had spent 40 years in the industry, the words felt like a physical force, pushing back against the weight of my uncle's ridicule. I have to ask," he continued, leaning in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "did you show this to Richard?" I just nodded, the memory still stinging. "And what did that old fool say?" I took a breath. "He laughed at me. He told me they sell steel, not pixels. He told me to stick to fixing printers." "Mr. Harrison closed his eyes and shook his head, a sad, knowing smile on his face. Of course he did. Pride has always been his blindfold. He would rather steer the ship into an iceberg than admit someone else saw it first. He then leaned forward, his eyes blazing with a sudden fierce energy that belied his age. Listen to me, Liam. Do not give this to them. Don't you dare. They don't deserve it. An idea like this doesn't belong to the past. It belongs to the future. It doesn't deserve to be locked in a cage by a man who's afraid of it. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. So here's what we're going to do. You and me. We're going to build this ourselves. I have some money saved up, and more importantly, I still have contacts, real contacts, people who actually build things, not just play golf. Let's start our own company. Let's not just save one company. Let's change the entire industry. Let's make your uncle's laughter the most expensive mistake of his life. In that moment, the hurt and humiliation didn't vanish, but they transformed. They became fuel. The path forward was suddenly, terrifyingly, brilliantly clear. I wasn't the rejected nephew anymore. I was a founder. The decision was made in that coffee shop, but the reality began in the dusty, cramped space of my garage. It was a humble, almost comical beginning for what Mr. Harrison and I envisioned as an industry-changing enterprise. We christened our new company Nexus Solutions, a name I'd held onto from the project's inception. My garage, once a repository for forgotten furniture and garden tools, became our headquarters. We dragged in a pair of folding tables, ran a thick orange extension cord from the kitchen, and set up our workstations. Mr. Harrison, a former CTO of a multi-million-dollar corporation, didn't complain once. He seemed energized by the Spartan, back-to-basics environment. He handled the business side of things, incorporating the company, setting up the financials, and drafting a business plan that was both ambitious and meticulous. His initial investment, a significant chunk of his retirement savings, was the lifeblood that allowed us to exist. It was enough to cover the legal fees, the server costs, and a small, almost laughable salary for me so I could quit my dead-end IT support job. Quitting that job was the first, truly liberating step. I walked in, gave my 2 weeks' notice, and felt a sense of purpose I had never experienced before. My family, of course, thought I was insane. When my mother called to ask why I'd left a stable job, I gave her the same vague answer I always did. I'm pursuing a freelance opportunity. I could hear the disappointment and confusion in her voice. In her mind, I had just traded a molehill of stability for a mountain of uncertainty. Meanwhile, my every waking hour was consumed by Nexus. The platform I had built as a passion project now had to be hardened into a commercial-grade product. The days blurred into a relentless cycle of coding, debugging, and refinement. I'd start before the sun came up, fueled by coffee that was more sludge than liquid, and often work late into the night. The glow of my monitors, the only light in the quiet garage. Sarah was my lifeline. She would appear at the garage door with sandwiches and a smile, listen patiently as I tried to explain a complex problem with the database architecture, and gently remind me to sleep. Her belief in me was the silent, steady engine that powered me through the exhaustion and the doubt. This was the grind, the unglamorous, unseen work that underpins every overnight success story. It was just me, Mr. Harrison, and a shared, unwavering vision in a cold garage, building our empire one line of code at a time. The grind was a crucible. It was long, arduous, and utterly devoid of glamour. For the better part of a year, my world shrank to the four walls of that garage. My tan faded, replaced by the pale glow of a computer screen. My social life, already minimal, evaporated completely. Friends would call, and I'd have to turn them down, offering vague excuses. The only person I saw consistently besides Mr. Harrison was Sarah. She was a saint. She accepted that our date nights would often consist of her reading a book in a lawn chair in the garage, while I wrestled with a piece of code that refused to cooperate. She never once complained. She understood that I wasn't just building a company, I was rebuilding myself. My days were a monotonous rhythm of intense focus. I would spend hours, sometimes days, on a single problem. Optimizing a search algorithm, strengthening the security protocols, refining the user interface until it was so intuitive a child could use it. Mr. Harrison was my perfect counterpart. While I was lost in the digital weeds, he was laying the groundwork for our business. He was on the phone constantly, calling in old favors, talking to former colleagues, testing the waters. He was planting the seeds of our future success, reestablishing a network that Richard had foolishly assumed was defunct. There were moments of profound doubt. I'd be staring at a screen full of error messages at 3 a.m, the weight of Mr. Harrison's investment and my own ambition pressing down on me, and I'd think, what if Richard was right? What if this is just a fantasy? But then I would remember the look on his face, the sound of his laugh, and that memory, once a source of deep pain, had become a powerful motivator. It was the fire that kept my forge burning. I was pouring all of that humiliation, all of that anger, all of the years of being underestimated into the very structure of Nexus. Every clean line of code, every elegant solution was a silent act of defiance. I wasn't just writing a software program, I was writing my own vindication. Sarah could see the toll it was taking, but she could also see the change in me. The defensive, reserved shell I had built around myself was starting to crack, replaced by a quiet, focused determination. "You seem different," she said one evening, handing me a cup of tea. "Tired, but solid, like you're finally building what you were meant to build." She was right. In the solitude of that garage, surrounded by lines of code and the hum of servers, I was finally becoming myself. The call came on a Tuesday. It was my mother, her voice laced with that specific brand of forced cheerfulness that meant a mandatory family gathering was on the horizon. It was Chloe's birthday, and Uncle Richard and Aunt Eleanor were hosting a dinner. Attendance was not optional. A part of me wanted to refuse to claim I was sick or had a prior commitment. The thought of facing them, of sitting at that mahogany table and enduring their condescending questions, made my stomach clench. But another part of me, a newer, more resilient part, was curious. I was a different person than the last time I'd seen them. I was no longer just the nephew with a hobby. I was the co-founder and chief architect of a burgeoning tech company. They didn't know it, of course, and that was the secret shield I would carry with me into the lion's den. The dinner was exactly as I had predicted. Richard was at his most bombastic, holding court about a minor, temporary uptick in quarterly sales. He spoke of it as if he had single-handedly turned the tide of the global economy. "It's all about fundamentals, you see," he declared to the table. "Good old-fashioned salesmanship and a quality product, all this digital nonsense is just noise." He glanced at me as he said it, a subtle, pointed reminder of our last conversation. I just took a slow sip of water, my expression neutral. The dramatic irony was so thick I could taste it. Here he was, boasting about a meaningless statistical blip, while in my garage an engine was being built that would make his entire business model obsolete. Chloe, the birthday girl, was insufferable. She unwrapped a ridiculously expensive designer handbag from her parents with a squeal of delight and then spent 20 minutes talking about her new groundbreaking marketing initiative. It turned out to be a plan to put QR codes on their shipping crates. "It's all about synergy and engagement," she said, using buzzwords she clearly didn't understand. "We're bringing sterling suns into the 20th century. The urge to laugh was almost overwhelming. My system could track a single bolt from furnace to installation in real time, and she was proud of a QR code. Then came the inevitable moment. The spotlight turned to me. "So, Liam," my aunt asked, her voice as always, gentle and somewhat detached. "Your mother said you left your job. What are you up to these days?" All eyes were on me. Richard leaned forward slightly, a smirk playing on his lips, clearly expecting to hear about some failed venture. "I'm doing some freelance IT consulting," I said, the lie tasting like ash in my mouth, but necessary. "Mostly contract work for small businesses." "It's keeping me busy." Richard sat back, the smirk widening into a satisfied smile. He exchanged a look with Chloe, a look that spoke volumes. It was a look of pity, of confirmation that I was, and always would be, aimless and small time in their eyes. "Well," Richard said, patting my shoulder as we left, "good for you for staying busy. Let me know if you ever decide you want a real career." I walked out into the cool night air, Sarah's hand finding mine in the darkness. She looked at me, her eyes searching my face. "Are you okay?" she asked. I smiled, a real, genuine smile. "I'm better than okay." The sting of their condescension was gone, replaced by the quiet, thrilling knowledge of what was to come. They were laughing at a ghost. The real me was miles away, in a garage, building the future. The breakthrough came on a rainy Thursday afternoon. It was a call from Mr. Harrison. His voice, usually calm and measured, was crackling with an excitement I had never heard from him before. "We got one," he said, and I could hear the grin in his voice. "Miller Dynamics. They signed the contract this morning." Miller Dynamics was a mid-sized manufacturing firm based a few towns over. They weren't a huge player, but they were respected, and more importantly, they were drowning in the same logistical inefficiencies that plagued Sterling Sons. Mr. Harrison had leveraged a contact from his old network, the son of the founder, a young tech-savvy VP who was desperate to modernize their operations. The implementation was our first real-world test. It was one thing for Nexus to work perfectly in the controlled environment of my garage. It was another to integrate it into the messy, complex reality of an active factory. The 2 weeks we spent on site were a blur of hard work and frantic problem solving. We laid network cables, installed servers, and trained their staff, who were initially skeptical but quickly won over by the system's intuitive design. I barely slept, tweaking the code on the fly to accommodate their specific, quirky workflow. The moment of truth came when we flipped the switch, taking the entire factory's operations live on the Nexus platform. For a few terrifying seconds, there was silence. Then, the system came to life. Orders flowed in, inventory was allocated, and the production schedule populated itself with ruthless efficiency. The VP of Miller Dynamics stood beside me, watching the main dashboard on a large monitor we had installed on the factory floor. He just stared, his mouth slightly agape, as data that used to take his team a week to compile was now being updated in real time, second by second. "My God," he whispered. It's perfect." The results were staggering. In the first month, Miller Dynamics reported a 40% reduction in production errors. In the second month, their on-time delivery rate hit 100% for the first time in the company's history. By the end of the first quarter, their overall operational efficiency had, by their own metrics, nearly doubled. The young VP became our biggest evangelist. He started talking about Nexus at industry conferences, at lunches, on the golf course. The whispers began. A new software, created by some unknown company called Nexus Solutions, was changing the game. Our first client wasn't just a financial victory, it was our proof of concept. It was the validation of every late night, every sacrifice, every line of code. We weren't just two guys in a garage with an idea anymore, we were a legitimate force. The success felt incredible, a deep, satisfying warmth that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with the quiet, profound joy of creation. My uncle had told me to stick to fixing printers. I had just successfully rebooted an entire company. The success with Miller Dynamics was like opening a floodgate. The whispers about Nexus Solutions grew into a steady buzz throughout the regional manufacturing community. Our initial success story, backed by hard, undeniable data, was more powerful than any marketing campaign Chloe could have ever devised. Suddenly, we weren't making cold calls. We were fielding inquiries. Mr. Harrison, with his decades of industry knowledge, was masterful at vetting potential clients, choosing partners who were not just looking for a fix, but were committed to a fundamental transformation of their business. In the span of 6 months, we signed 2 more clients, then 5, then 10. Each implementation was smoother than the last as we refined our process and expanded the capabilities of the Nexus platform. The workload became immense, far too much for just 2 people. The time had come to expand. We hired our first employee, a brilliant young network engineer named Ben, then a dedicated project manager, Maria. I found myself in the surreal position of conducting interviews, of being the boss. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Quitting my stable, low-level IT job had been a leap of faith. Now, I was responsible for the livelihoods of others. The weight of that responsibility settled on my shoulders, but it felt good, like a muscle being worked for the first time. The garage, once a symbol of our scrappy beginnings, was now impossibly cramped. We were practically tripping over each other and the new server racks we had to install. It was time for another upgrade. We found a small, modern office space for lease in a tech park on the other side of town. The day we moved in was a milestone. Walking through the empty rooms, the smell of fresh paint in the air, I felt a sense of accomplishment so profound it almost brought me to my knees. We had done it. We had built something real, something tangible, out of nothing more than an idea and a burning desire to prove my family wrong. Through all of this, I maintained my cover. To my family, I was still freelance Liam, the slightly lost, underachieving nephew. The contrast between my two realities was becoming increasingly stark. I would spend my day managing a team, making high-stakes decisions for a rapidly growing tech company, and then go to a family birthday party and have to listen to Chloe brag about getting a new corner office. The dramatic irony was a constant private source of amusement. They saw me standing in the kiddie pool, unaware that I was secretly the captain of a submarine gliding silently beneath them. I lived in fear of them finding out, not because I was ashamed, but because I wasn't ready. The reveal had to be on my terms, at a time of my choosing. The success was sweet, but the vindication, I knew, would be even sweeter. And it was a dish I was determined to serve cold. In the midst of building my secret empire, my Aunt Eleanor remained a quiet, almost peripheral figure in the family drama. I had always seen her as an extension of my uncle's world, a silent partner in his traditionalist reign. She was elegant, perpetually composed, and at family gatherings she functioned as a master diplomat, smoothing over Richard's conversational rough edges and steering conversations away from potential conflict. She dressed in understated classic styles, and her presence was calming, but also distant. She seemed to exist in a protective bubble, observing the chaos of the family from a safe remove. Richard treated her with a kind of affectionate condescension. He clearly loved her, but he also clearly saw her as a domestic figure, someone who managed the house and the social calendar, but had no place in the real world of business and steel. He would often cut her off in conversation if she veered into a topic he considered his domain, patting her hand and saying something like, now, Eleanor. Don't you worry your pretty little head about that. It was infuriating to watch, but she never seemed to react, her serene expression never faltering. However, I had started to notice small things, tiny cracks in her placid facade. During that awful presentation in Richard's office while he was laughing and Chloe was smirking, I had caught Eleanor's eye for just a fraction of a second. She had been brought in to witness my humiliation, another testament to my folly. But in that fleeting glance, I didn't see pity or amusement. I saw something else, something I couldn't quite decipher at the time. It was a look of sharp critical assessment, not of me, but of her husband. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, but it stuck with me. Then, at subsequent family functions, I noticed she had started asking me questions, quiet questions, when Richard was distracted. They weren't the usual, "How are you?" pleasantries. They were specific, insightful. "That freelance work you're doing, Liam," she asked once, her voice low, "is it mostly software or hardware integration?" I was so taken aback by the technical accuracy of the question that I stammered a vague answer. Richard, overhearing, immediately intervened. "Eleanor, you're boring the boy. He doesn't want to talk shop with you." And she had simply smiled and changed the subject. But the seed was planted. There was more to Aunt Eleanor than the demure, supportive wife. There was a keen intellect hiding behind that serene mask, a mind that was paying far more attention than anyone, especially her husband, seemed to realize. It was a foreshadowing I didn't fully understand at the time, a hint that the most powerful piece on the chessboard was the one everyone else assumed was just a decoration. While Nexus Solutions was experiencing a meteoric rise, Sterling Sons was in a nosedive. The news came to me not through data scrapes or industry gossip, but through the much more reliable and dramatic channel of family chatter. My mother would call me, her voice fraught with worry. "Your uncle is so stressed, Liam, they lost the Henderson account." The Henderson account was a cornerstone of Sterling Sons, a client they had supplied for over 30 years. Losing them wasn't just a financial blow, it was a symbolic one. It was a sign that the old loyalties, the handshake deals Richard prized so highly, were no longer enough. The reasons for the decline were precisely what I had predicted. Clients were demanding more traceability in their supply chains, faster turnaround times, and predictive maintenance capabilities for the components they purchased. They were moving to suppliers who could provide not just a product, but a service, an integrated solution. Richard's response was a stubborn, panicked refusal to acknowledge the new reality. According to my mother, he spent his days ranting about betrayal, about how Henderson had been lured away by some flashy tech startup that was probably all smoke and mirrors. He couldn't or wouldn't see that he was the architect of his own demise. He initiated brutal cost-cutting measures. He laid off experienced workers, many of whom had been with the company for decades. He squeezed his own suppliers for better terms, damaging relationships that my grandfather had spent a lifetime building. Morale at the plant plummeted. The quality of the product, once the unassailable hallmark of the Sterling brand, began to suffer. The company, once a proud lion of industry, was now a wounded, snarling beast lashing out at shadows while it slowly bled to death. Richard's pride was a poison, and it was killing the company I had once so desperately wanted to save. A strange sense of detachment washed over me as I listened to these reports. The hurt I once felt had been replaced by a clinical, almost academic interest. I was watching my own hypothesis being proven correct in the most dramatic way possible. I had offered them the antidote, and they had laughed in my face. Now the disease was running its inevitable course, and I, the once scorned nephew, was holding the patent for the cure. The occasion was my Aunt Eleanor's birthday, a much more subdued affair than Chloe's extravaganza. It was held at a high-end restaurant, the kind with white tablecloths and hushed, reverent waiters. The mood was palpably tense. The loss of the Henderson account and the subsequent layoffs had cast a long, dark shadow over the family. Richard, usually the life of any party, was sullen and withdrawn. He drank his scotch too quickly, his face a mask of barely concealed resentment. Chloe, for her part, was attempting to maintain an air of breezy indifference, but it wasn't working. She complained bitterly about the recent budget cuts Richard had imposed on her marketing department. "It's impossible to innovate without resources, Daddy," she whined, poking at a scallop on her plate. "How am I supposed to launch my new digital outreach campaign without a proper budget?" It was all I could do to keep a straight face. My digital outreach campaign consisted of Mr. Harrison's legendary Rolodex and a product that actually worked, and it was currently eating their lunch. The conversation eventually and inevitably turned to me. This time, it was Richard who initiated it. He looked across the table at me, his eyes slightly glazed from the scotch. "Well, Liam," he slurred, a bitter edge to his voice. "I suppose you're happy in your little world. No big clients to lose, no payroll to meet. Must be nice to have no responsibilities." The irony was so profound, so exquisitely perfect, that it was almost a physical sensation. I was currently in the middle of a multi-million-dollar negotiation to acquire a logistics company to support our expansion. I had a payroll of 12 employees that depended on me. His entire perception of my life was a work of pure fiction. "The freelance life has its ups and downs," I said, my voice calm and even. "But I can't complain." "Damn right you can't," he muttered, more to himself than to me. "Some of us have real problems." "Problems you couldn't possibly understand." Chloe nodded in fervent agreement. "Honestly, Liam, you're lucky you don't have to deal with the stress. The pressure at the executive level is just immense." I just nodded slowly, taking a sip of wine. I let their words wash over me, their condescension now feeling less like an attack and more like a shield. Their complete and utter ignorance of my reality was the best protection I could have asked for. They were so lost in their own crumbling world that they couldn't see the new one being built right under their noses by the one person they had written off completely. As I sat there, listening to them complain about the very problems my software was designed to solve, I felt a strange sense of peace. The anger was gone. The hurt was a distant memory. All that was left was a quiet, unshakable confidence. The game was already over. They just hadn't realized it yet. The next major milestone for Nexus Solutions was a silent strategic coup. Mr. Harrison, through his impeccable network, learned that Sterling Sons' primary competitor, a more agile and forward-thinking company called Atlas Manufacturing, was actively looking for a technology partner to overhaul their operations. They had seen what was happening in the market and were determined not to suffer the same fate as Sterling. This was the opportunity we had been waiting for. It was a chance to move from the minor leagues to the majors. Mr. Harrison secured a meeting with their CEO, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Cassandra Hayes. This time, I wasn't a nervous nephew in a borrowed suit. I was the co-founder and chief architect of Nexus Solutions. I walked into their boardroom with my team, feeling a sense of command I had never known before. I didn't just present the software, I presented a vision. I showed them how Nexus could integrate with their existing systems, how it could streamline their workflow, and most importantly, how our IoT-enabled components would give them a decisive competitive advantage. Cassandra Hayes was the polar opposite of my uncle. She asked sharp, insightful questions. She challenged our assumptions. She saw the potential immediately. After a week of intense negotiations and technical due diligence, we signed the deal. It was our biggest contract by an order of magnitude. The implementation at Atlas Manufacturing was a massive undertaking, but my team was ready. We worked tirelessly, and within 3 months, Atlas was running on Nexus. The results were immediate and dramatic. Their production efficiency skyrocketed. Their ability to provide clients with real-time data and predictive maintenance made them an irresistible choice in the marketplace. Atlas Manufacturing, powered by Nexus, began systematically picking off Sterling, Sun's remaining clients. They weren't just competing anymore, they were dominating. They could offer a superior service at a more competitive price, all thanks to the efficiencies our platform provided. Every new client Atlas signed was another nail in Sterling's coffin. I was, in essence, arming the enemy. I was providing the very weapon that was dismantling my family's legacy. A younger version of myself would have been racked with guilt. But the boy who had been laughed out of Richard's office was gone. I felt a cold, hard clarity about my actions. Business is not about sentiment. It's about innovation and adaptation. Richard had refused to adapt, and now he was facing the consequences. I was simply on the right side of progress. The most deliciously ironic part of it all was that my uncle, in his rants to the family about the underhanded tactics of Atlas Manufacturing, had no idea that the architect of his destruction was passing him the mashed potatoes at Thanksgiving dinner. The email arrived on a Monday morning. The sender was E. Sterling, and the subject line was a single word, inquiry. My heart skipped a beat. I opened it, and the message was brief, formal, and utterly unexpected. It read, "Dear Liam, I hope this message finds you well. I have been hearing some interesting things within certain business circles about a new technology firm named Nexus Solutions. The name has come up in relation to the recent success of several manufacturing companies in the region. Given your background in IT, I thought you might have some insider knowledge of this company. I would be very interested to hear your thoughts. Sincerely, Eleanor Sterling." I read the email 3 times. It was a masterclass in plausible deniability. On the surface, it was just a casual inquiry from an aunt to her tech-savvy nephew, but I knew it was more than that. The phrasing was too precise. Certain business circles, insight or knowledge. This wasn't a random question. This was a calculated probe. She knew. Or at least, she suspected. My mind raced. How could she know? Richard and Chloe were completely oblivious, but Eleanor was different. She was an observer. She was intelligent. Perhaps she had done her own research, connected the dots that her husband and daughter were too self-absorbed to even see. This was a pivotal moment, a fork in the road. I could play dumb, stick to my freelance cover story, and avoid the confrontation, or I could step into the light. My first instinct was to call Mr. Harrison, but I stopped myself. This was a family matter, twisted and complicated as it was. This was a move on the chessboard that I had to play myself. Sarah read the email over my shoulder, her expression thoughtful. "She's smart, Liam," she said quietly. "Richard dismisses her, but she's not a fool. This isn't an accusation. It's an invitation." An invitation. That felt right. It was an invitation to reveal my hand, but on her terms, in a space she was trying to create. It was a test. After an hour of deliberation, I typed out my reply, my fingers hovering over the keyboard as I weighed each word. "Dear Aunt Eleanor," I wrote, "You're right. Nexus Solutions is making quite a name for itself. The work they're doing is fascinating. Perhaps we could discuss it further. I would be happy to meet with you at your convenience. Best, Liam." I hit send before I could second-guess myself. The ball was in her court. The quietest member of the Sterling family had just made the boldest move yet, and I had just agreed to play the game. Her reply came within the hour. It was just as precise and discreet as her first message. She suggested a time and a place. Wednesday at 2 p.m., in the Garden Court Cafe of the city's main art museum. It was a perfect choice. Public, yet quiet. Neutral territory, far from the emotionally charged environments of either the Sterling mansion or my new office. It was a place for secrets to be shared under the guise of a civilized cup of tea. For the next 2 days, I was a wreck. My focus at work was shot. I would stare at lines of code and see my aunt's serene, unreadable face. What was her angle? Was this a trap? Was she gathering intelligence for Richard, a final, desperate attempt to understand the enemy that was destroying him? Or was it something else entirely? Every possible scenario played out in my head. I imagined her accusing me of betrayal, of intentionally ruining the family. I imagined her pleading with me to stop, to show mercy. I imagined her demanding a cut of my success. The one scenario I couldn't quite bring myself to imagine was the one that felt the most impossible, that she was on my side. "You have to go," Sarah insisted the night before the meeting. We were sitting on our small balcony, the city lights twinkling below. "You can't run from this. You've built all of this, Liam. You have nothing to be ashamed of. You're not the one who should be nervous." She was right, of course. I was the one holding all the cards. I was the CEO of a successful, growing company. I was the one who had seen the future correctly. And yet, the old family dynamics were a powerful undertow, pulling me back into the role of the insecure, overlooked nephew. The boy who was laughed at was still a part of me, and he was terrified of this meeting. On Wednesday, I dressed carefully. Not in a suit, the armor of the corporate world, but in smart, casual clothes. I wanted to meet her as myself, not as a character I was playing. I arrived at the museum early and walked through the galleries, trying to calm my racing heart with the quiet beauty of Impressionist paintings. At exactly 2 p.m., I saw her enter the cafe. She looked exactly as she always did, elegant, composed, her silver hair perfectly coiffed. She scanned the room, her eyes meeting mine. She gave me a small, almost imperceptible nod and walked to a quiet corner table. I took a deep breath, straightened my shoulders, and walked towards her, feeling as if I were stepping onto a stage for the final act of a play I didn't have the script for. I sat down opposite her, the small marble table feeling like a vast empty space between us. A waiter appeared, and we ordered tea, a simple, mundane act that felt absurdly normal given the tension crackling in the air. For a few moments after the waiter left, we were silent. Eleanor simply looked at me, her gaze not hostile or accusatory, but deeply, intensely analytical. It was the same look I had seen for a fleeting second in Richard's office, and this time, I understood it. It was the look of one intelligent mind assessing another. She was the one who broke the silence. "Thank you for meeting me, Liam," she said, her voice low and even. I imagine my email was something of a surprise. It was, I admitted, my own voice steadier than I expected. "Nexus Solutions is your company, isn't it?" she asked. It wasn't a question, it was a statement of fact. There was no point in denying it. The game was over. "Yes," I said. "It is." I braced myself for the explosion, for the tears, for the accusations of betrayal. None of them came. She simply nodded slowly, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. "I thought so," she said. I've been tracking the whispers for months. Atlas Manufacturing's sudden dominance, the talk of a revolutionary logistics platform. Richard blames corporate espionage, bad luck, the economy. He blames everything but himself. She paused, taking a delicate sip of her tea. But I knew it had to be something more, something fundamental. I started digging. Public records, incorporation documents. Your name wasn't on them, but Arthur Harrison's was. And I remembered him. I remembered how Richard pushed him out, terrified of his vision for the future. It wasn't hard to connect the dots from there. The calmness of her revelation was more stunning than any outburst would have been. She had pieced it all together, quietly, methodically, while everyone else remained blind. Then, she did something that truly shocked me. She smiled. It was not her usual placid social smile. It was a real, genuine smile tinged with a deep, weary sadness. You know, she said, I was the one who told Richard to listen to you that day. I told him your generation understands things he doesn't. I told him to take your proposal seriously. She sighed, the sound heavy with years of frustration. He patted my hand and told me not to worry my pretty little head about it. He thought you were a boy with a toy, and he thought I was a fool who didn't understand his world. It was then that she laid her final card on the table, the one that would change the entire game. What Richard likes to forget, she said, leaning in slightly, her voice dropping even lower, is that while my father left him the CEO title, he left me 40% of the company's voting shares. He always said I had a better head for business than Richard did. My shares, combined with the ones held by a few other board members who have lost all faith in my husband's leadership, are enough. We have a controlling interest. My mind reeled. I felt like the ground had shifted beneath me. Eleanor, the quiet, dismissed wife, was the secret queen on the chessboard, the one with the real power. I can't watch him run my father's company into the ground any longer, she said, her voice now steel. His pride is going to destroy everything my father built. But I can't just oust him. The board needs a viable alternative. A plan for the future. She looked at me, her eyes clear and sharp. You, Liam, are that plan. The air in the cafe, which had felt charged with tension, was now electric with possibility. My mind struggled to process the sheer scale of what she was proposing. For years, I had seen her as a silent, passive figure, a casualty of my uncle's domineering personality, but I was just as guilty as he was of underestimating her. She wasn't a victim. She was a strategist who had been waiting, with incredible patience, for the right moment to make her move. What are you proposing exactly? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. I knew the answer, but I needed to hear her say it. I am not proposing we save Richard's pride, she stated, her voice cold and clear. I am proposing we save Sterling, Sons. I want to save my father's legacy, the jobs of the people who work there, and the name that once stood for quality and innovation. She leaned forward, the calm demeanor replaced by a fierce intensity. I am proposing that Nexus Solutions makes a formal offer to acquire Sterling, Sons Manufacturing, not as a bailout, as a strategic acquisition. We will absorb their assets, their client list, what's left of it, and their infrastructure. We will integrate your technology, the very technology my husband ridiculed, and we will make this company whole again under new leadership. The audacity of it was breathtaking. It was a corporate coup, orchestrated from within the family. It was a move so ruthless and brilliant that I could only stare at her in stunned admiration. Richard will be removed as CEO, she continued, laying out the brutal reality of her plan. The board will vote him out. With my shares and my allies, it's a foregone conclusion. He will be offered a generous severance package, but his involvement with the company will be terminated, effective immediately. She saw the look on my face, the mixture of shock and, I had to admit, thrilling vindication. Do not mistake me, Liam. This is not about revenge for you, or for me. This is about survival. Richard is a captain who is actively steering his ship towards an iceberg, and it is our duty to the crew and the ship itself to relieve him of command. Your system, your company, is the only lifeboat in sight. She was offering me everything. The company that had rejected me, the ultimate validation, the chance to not just beat my uncle, but to absorb his kingdom and remake it in my own image. It was a declaration of war, and she was handing me the crown before the first shot was even fired. Will you do it? She asked, her eyes searching mine. Will you partner with me to save my father's company from my husband? There was only one possible answer. Yes, I said, the word feeling more significant than any I had ever spoken. Yes, I will. The meeting with Eleanor felt like a dream, but the days that followed were a whirlwind of concrete, strategic action. Our alliance, forged over tea and secrets, was now a full-blown operation. The very next day, I brought Mr. Harrison up to speed. We met in my office, the door closed, and I recounted the entire conversation with Eleanor. He listened, his expression shifting from surprise to a slow, wide grin. Arthur Sterling was a smart man, he said, shaking his head in wonder. He knew. He knew his son was a fool and his daughter was a powerhouse. He put the emergency brake in her hands the whole time. Mr. Harrison, with his years of experience in corporate governance and acquisitions, immediately shifted into high gear. He saw the brilliance of Eleanor's plan not just as a personal victory, but as a sound business strategy. Sterling Sons, despite its mismanagement, still had valuable assets, a well-known brand name, significant physical infrastructure, and a skilled, albeit demoralized workforce. Acquiring them for what would inevitably be a rock-bottom price, and then injecting our technology and management, was a recipe for exponential growth. We held our first secret war council a few days later. It was the three of us. Me, the young tech visionary, Mr. Harrison, the seasoned industry veteran, and Eleanor, the quiet, unassuming matriarch who held the key to the entire kingdom. We met at Mr. Harrison's home, a place of absolute neutrality. The synergy between the three of us was immediate and powerful. Eleanor provided the intricate, inside knowledge of Sterling Sons' finances, its political landscape, and its key shareholders. Mr. Harrison mapped out the legal and financial strategy for the acquisition. And I presented the technical plan for the integration of Nexus, a detailed step-by-step blueprint for transforming Sterling Sons from an analog relic into a modern, efficient powerhouse. The lawyers were brought in next, discreetly. They worked with Mr. Harrison to draft a formal, aggressive, but fair acquisition offer. We structured it in a way that would be impossible for any responsible board member to refuse, especially when contrasted with the company's current catastrophic trajectory. It was surreal. Just a year and a half ago, I was a dejected young man in a garage, trying to build something out of sheer spite and determination. Now, I was in a room with a legendary CTO and the secret queen of the Sterling dynasty, planning a corporate takeover of the very company that had cast me out. The plan was meticulous. Eleanor would formally request an emergency meeting of the board of directors. Richard would assume it was to discuss further austerity measures. Eleanor would then present the board with the unvarnished, brutal truth of the company's financial situation, followed immediately by our acquisition offer. The timing had to be perfect. The shock had to be overwhelming. It was a corporate blitzkrieg, and we were poised to launch it. As the final pieces fell into place, I felt a strange sense of calm. This was bigger than my personal vindication now. It was about fulfilling the potential of my creation, about honoring Mr. Harrison's faith in me, and strangely, about fulfilling the secret wish of my grandfather, who had trusted his daughter's business acumen over his own son's bluster. The stage was set for the final confrontation. The call for the emergency board meeting sent a shockwave through the upper echelons of Sterling Sons. Eleanor, who had not initiated a board-level action in her entire life, had formally requested the meeting, citing grave concerns about the company's immediate financial viability. Richard was completely blindsided. According to the frantic, worried phone call I received from my mother, he was furious. He saw it as Eleanor overstepping her bounds, meddling in things she didn't understand. He apparently ranted for an hour about how he had everything under control and this was an unnecessary distraction. He was walking into his own execution, completely unaware that the axe was about to fall. In his arrogance, he couldn't conceive of a reality where Eleanor was anything other than his passive, supportive wife. He assumed she had been panicked by gossip and that he would easily placate her and the board with one of his usual blustering speeches about grit and tradition. On the day of the meeting, I felt a cold knot of anticipation in my stomach. I was not to be present for the first part of the meeting. This was Eleanor's stage. She had to be the one to dismantle Richard's authority, to expose the truth of his failure to the people who had for too long enabled it. Mr. Harrison and I waited in a coffee shop a block away from the Sterling Sons headquarters. My phone was on the table, face up. We had arranged for Eleanor's assistant to send me a simple text message. Now, that would be our cue to walk over, to enter the boardroom at the moment of maximum dramatic impact. Nervous? Mr. Harrison asked, stirring his coffee with a steady hand. Terrified, I admitted. Don't be, he said, looking at me with a calm confidence that was incredibly reassuring. You earned this. You built the better mousetrap. They refused to buy it, so now you're buying the whole house. The minutes tick by like hours. I imagined the scene in that boardroom, a room I had only been in once, under circumstances of complete humiliation. I pictured the faces of the board members, old allies of my grandfather, who had watched Richard slowly run the company into the ground out of a misplaced sense of loyalty or apathy. And I pictured Eleanor standing up to her husband for the first time in a public forum, armed with facts, figures, and the undeniable truth. This was more than a business deal. It was a reckoning. It was the culmination of lies, of pride, of willful blindness. The old world of Sterling, Sons was about to come crashing down, and I was waiting just outside the gates, ready to build a new one from the rubble. The text message arrived at 3:15 p.m. A single word: now. Mr. Harrison and I stood up, left a $20 bill on the table, and walked out into the afternoon sun. The short, one-block walk to the Sterling Sons headquarters felt like the longest walk of my life. Every step was heavy with the weight of the past and the uncertainty of the future. We were buzzed through security, as arranged by Eleanor, and took the elevator to the top floor. As we approached the boardroom, the muffled sound of a raised voice could be heard. It was Richard's. He was clearly in the middle of one of his tirades. We paused at the door, taking a final deep breath. Then, we opened the doors and walked in. The scene was electric. Richard was on his feet, his face beet red, jabbing a finger at a set of printouts on the table. The board members looked stunned, uncomfortable. Chloe, who had apparently been invited by her father, sat beside him, looking pale and confused. And at the head of the table, in Richard's customary seat, sat Eleanor. She was the picture of calm, her hands folded neatly in front of her. She looked up as we entered, and her eyes met mine with a look of steely resolve. Our entrance brought Richard's rant to an abrupt halt. He stared at us, his mouth agape. The fury on his face was quickly replaced by a look of utter, bewildered confusion. Liam? Arthur? What in God's name are you doing here? This is a private board meeting. Eleanor's voice cut through the tension, calm and sharp as glass. They are here at my invitation, Richard. Richard turned to her, his confusion curdling back into anger. At your invitation? Have you lost your mind, Eleanor? On the contrary, she replied, her voice unwavering. I have just finished presenting the board with the unvarnished financial reality of this company. A reality you have been concealing from them for over a year. We are 3 weeks from insolvency. A wave of murmurs went through the board. Richard sputtered. That's a lie. A gross exaggeration. Is it? Eleanor countered, gesturing to the printouts. The numbers don't lie. We are hemorrhaging money, our market share is non-existent, and our largest competitor, she paused, for effect Atlas Manufacturing, is thriving precisely because they embrace the kind of technological innovation you dismissed as a digital fantasy. And then came the final killing blow. The board agrees that a drastic change in leadership and strategy is our only option for survival, Eleanor announced to the silent room. To that end, we have received a formal and very generous acquisition offer from a highly successful technology firm that specializes in manufacturing modernization. Richard actually scoffed, a desperate, hollow sound. And what fool would be crazy enough to buy this company now? He looked around the room, searching for an ally, but found only averted eyes. Eleanor held his gaze. Her face was impassive, but her eyes were filled with a terrible, righteous fire. The offer, she said, each word landing like a hammer blow, is from Nexus Solutions. She let the name hang in the air for a moment before delivering the coup de grace. And the co-founder and CEO of Nexus Solutions is your nephew, Liam. The silence that followed Eleanor's announcement was the most profound I have ever experienced. It was a vacuum, sucking all the air and sound out of the room. Richard just stared at me, his face a kaleidoscope of emotions, shock, disbelief, confusion, and finally a dawning, horrified understanding. The dots connected in his mind, live, in real time, the freelance work, my sudden departure from my stable job, Atlas Manufacturing's impossible success. It all crashed down on him in a single devastating moment. You? He whispered, the single word filled with a universe of betrayal. Chloe was looking back and forth between me, her father, and her mother, her expression one of complete childlike bewilderment. The concept was so far outside her understanding of the world that her brain simply couldn't process it. Richard's shock quickly hardened into pure, unrestrained fury. You did this! He roared, pointing a trembling finger at me. This was a setup! You conspired with him! He gestured wildly at Mr. Harrison. And with her! His voice cracked as he pointed at his own wife. You planned this! To betray me! To destroy your own family! This was my moment. The moment I had dreamed of, consciously or not, since I walked out of his office dripping with humiliation. But now that it was here, I felt no desire to gloat. I felt only a cold, hard sense of clarity. I stepped forward, my voice calm and steady, a stark contrast to his raging outburst. I didn't do this, Richard! You did. I looked around at the stunned faces of the board members. Over a year ago, I came into this very building. I sat in your office and I presented you with Nexus. Not as a weapon, but as a lifeline. I offered you the future of this industry, the very system that has made our company successful and your competitors strong. I offered it to you to save our family's company. I turned my gaze back to him. And you laughed. You didn't just say no, you humiliated me. You and Chloe. You called my life's work a cute fantasy and told me to stick to fixing printers. I let that hang in the air. Well, I didn't stick to fixing printers. I built that fantasy into a reality. I built it into a multi-million-dollar company. I didn't betray you, Richard. You betrayed my grandfather's legacy. Your pride, your refusal to listen, your inability to see the world as it is has run this company into the ground. My offer, I concluded, my voice dropping but losing none of its intensity, is not an act of betrayal. It's an act of salvation. It is the only thing standing between Sterling, Sons, and bankruptcy. My speech was met with another stunned silence. I had not spoken as the boy he remembered, but as the CEO I had become. The power dynamic in the room had irrevocably and visibly shifted. The reign of Richard Sterling was over. The aftermath of the confrontation was swift and brutal. My words, combined with the grim financial data Eleanor had presented, left the board with no alternative. The vote was called. It was nearly unanimous. The motion to accept the acquisition offer from Nexus Solutions was passed. Richard was stripped of his title and his power in a matter of minutes. He didn't take it with dignity. He slumped into his chair as if the strings holding him up had been cut. He looked aged, defeated, a king dethroned in his own throne room. He didn't say another word. He just stared at the polished surface of the table, at the reflection of a man he no longer recognized. Chloe, finally processing the reality of the situation, burst into tears. They weren't tears of sadness for her father. They were tears of rage and self-pity. How could you do this to us, Liam? She shrieked, her voice shrill. We're family! You've ruined everything! Mr. Harrison stepped forward. On the contrary, Miss Sterling, he said, his tone firm but not unkind. He has just saved it. Richard finally stood up, his movement slow and heavy. He didn't look at me. He couldn't. He gave his wife one last look, a look of profound, venomous betrayal, and then he wordlessly turned and walked out of the boardroom. Chloe scrambled after him, still sobbing, throwing a final, I hate you, over her shoulder at me. Watching them go, I didn't feel the triumphant joy I might have expected. The victory felt complex, tinged with the sadness of a necessary amputation. I had cut away a diseased part of my life, but it was a part of me nonetheless. Sarah was waiting for me back at my office. I had called her the moment the vote was passed. She didn't say anything when I walked in. She just opened her arms, and I collapsed into her embrace, the adrenaline and emotional exhaustion of the day finally catching up to me. She was my anchor in the storm, my constant, my truth. You did it, she whispered into my hair. I know it hurts, but you did the right thing. The transition period was messy, as all such transitions are. We officially took control of Sterling Sons the following week. My first act as the new head of the combined company was to hold an all-hands meeting with the employees. I stood before them, not as a conqueror, but as a partner. I laid out my vision for the future, a future that combined the legacy of Sterling's quality with the innovation of Nexus's technology. I assured them that their jobs were safe and that the era of mismanagement was over. Some longtime employees, fiercely loyal to Richard, quit in protest. I let them go. But many more, the ones who had suffered under his chaotic leadership, looked at me with a cautious, burgeoning hope. I was no longer just the CEO of a tech startup. I was now the custodian of a legacy, responsible for hundreds of employees and a brand name that, tarnished as it was, still meant something. The weight of it was immense, but for the first time in my life, I felt strong enough to carry it. A few weeks after the takeover, my mother called. She asked me to meet with Richard and Chloe. She said they were devastated, that they couldn't understand what had happened. She begged me to talk to them, to explain things, as if this were all a simple misunderstanding that could be cleared up over coffee. A part of me wanted to refuse. There was nothing left to say. But another part knew that for my own peace of mind, for the sake of drawing a final, definitive line, I needed to have this conversation. Sarah agreed. You need closure, she said. You need to see them for who they are without the filter of hope or obligation. I agreed to the meeting, but on my terms. Not at a family home, not in an office, but at a neutral hotel conference room that I booked myself. I needed the environment to be sterile, stripped of any emotional history. I arrived first and sat at the large empty table, feeling a strange sense of déjà vu. I was once again waiting for them, but this time the power dynamics were entirely reverse. They arrived together, a united front of bitterness and resentment. Richard looked gaunt, his usual confident bluster completely gone, replaced by a sullen, simmering anger. Chloe's face was puffy from crying, her expression a mask of petulant victimhood. They sat down opposite me, and the silence was thick with unspoken accusations. I decided to begin. I agreed to this meeting because Mom asked me to. I said, my voice, even and calm. I'm here to answer any questions you have, but I want to be clear. The board's decision is final. This is not a negotiation. Richard just grunted, staring at his hands. It was Chloe who spoke, her voice dripping with venom. Questions? You want us to ask questions? How about, why did you destroy our family, Liam? Why did you stab your own uncle in the back? I didn't destroy the family, Chloe, I replied, refusing to take the bait. And I didn't stab Richard in the back. I presented him with an opportunity, and he chose to ridicule it. The company was failing. That's not my opinion, that's a financial fact. The path Richard was on led directly to bankruptcy. My father built that company, she shot back. It was our legacy. No, I corrected her gently. Grandfather built that company, and he would be ashamed to see what it became under Richard's leadership. A place that valued pride over progress, tradition over survival. I finally turned to Richard, who still refused to meet my eyes. I'm truly sorry for the pain this has caused you, Richard. That was never my intention. My intention was to save the company. The fact that you were in the way of that is a consequence of your own choices. He finally looked up, his eyes filled with a deep, bottomless bitterness. You will never be one of us, Liam. You can buy the company, you can sit in my chair, but you will never have the Sterling name. Not really. It was in that moment that I finally understood. They would never get it. They were incapable of introspection, incapable of seeing their own role in their downfall. There would be no apologies, no understanding, no reconciliation. And strangely, that realization was freeing. You're probably right, I said, a sense of peace settling over me. I pushed an envelope across the table towards them. This is a proposed severance package. It's more than generous. Eleanor and I insisted on it, but it is final. Your roles with the company are over. I stood up. The conversation was finished. I hope one day you both find peace. I walked out of the room without looking back, leaving them with their bitterness and their money. I had closed the door on the past, and for the first time, I felt truly, completely free. Months have passed since that final, difficult conversation. The world did not end. It simply changed. The integration of Sterling Sons into the Nexus Solutions ecosystem has been a monumental task, but an incredibly rewarding one. We rebranded the entire entity as Sterling Nexus, a name that honors the past while firmly looking to the future. Walking through the factory floor now is a completely different experience. The old dusty binders are gone, replaced by sleek tablets mounted at every workstation. The hum of the machinery is now accompanied by the quiet ping of data being collected, analyzed, and optimized. Morale has done a complete 180. The employees, once fearful for their jobs, are now active participants in the company's revival. We implemented a profit-sharing program and an innovation pipeline that allows any employee to submit ideas for improvement. We're not just making steel components anymore, we're building intelligent solutions, and the people on the factory floor are proud of that fact. The business is thriving in a way I had only dreamed of. We've not only won back the clients Sterling had lost, but we've also expanded into new markets. The Sterling Nexus name is becoming synonymous with the future of manufacturing. I often find myself standing in the office that once belonged to my uncle. I had it completely redesigned. The dark, imposing wood is gone, replaced with glass and open spaces. The massive desk is gone, replaced by a collaborative workstation. It's a space that's about transparency and innovation, not intimidation and authority. Sometimes, late at night, I'll stand at the window and look out over the city lights, and I'll reflect on the wild, improbable journey that brought me here. I think about the boy who was laughed at, the boy who felt so small and misunderstood. I don't feel anger towards him or pity for him anymore. I feel a sense of gratitude. His pain was the crucible that forged my determination. His humiliation was the fuel for my ambition. I've come to realize that this was never really about revenge. Revenge is a hot, explosive emotion, and what I felt during those long months of building Nexus was a cold, quiet, and relentless focus. It wasn't about tearing Richard down. It was about building myself up. The vindication I feel isn't about his failure. It's about my success. It's the profound, unshakable knowledge that I was right. My idea was valuable. My passion was not a fantasy. I proved my worth, not to him, not to my family, but to myself. And that is a victory that no one can ever take away from me. So, here I am. The story has, for now, found its new beginning. It's a story about how rejection can be redirection, and how sometimes the deepest betrayals can lead you to your greatest strengths. My relationship with my mother and the rest of my extended family is strained, but civil. They exist in a state of willful confusion about the whole affair, and I've learned to be okay with that. I cannot force them to see a truth they are determined to ignore. My real family is the one I've built. It's Sarah, my partner in every sense of the word, who is now leading our new charitable foundation. It's Mr. Harrison, who enjoys a very active semi-retirement, serving as my most trusted advisor and mentor. And it's Aunt Eleanor. She has blossomed outside of Richard's shadow. She is the active and brilliant chairperson of the Sterling Nexus board, her keen intellect and quiet strength now on full display for the world to see. She and I have forged a bond built on mutual respect and a shared vision, a bond stronger than the one I ever had with her husband. I found my power not by fighting the old system on its own terms, but by leaving it behind and building something new, something better. I built it so well that the old system had no choice but to become a part of my world. My success wasn't about getting them to believe in me. It was about me believing in myself so fiercely that their disbelief became irrelevant. I am at peace now. A deep and abiding peace that comes from living an authentic life, from aligning my work with my passion. The anger and hurt have faded, leaving behind a quiet wisdom and a profound sense of gratitude. And so I want to leave you with this question. What is an idea you believe in? What is a passion that others might not understand? Don't let the laughter of others silence the conviction in your own heart. Build your fantasy. Build it with everything you have. You never know, you might just build a new reality. Thank you so much for listening to my story. Let me know your thoughts down below. I'll be reading the comments. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.